I got surprised because, at my wife's funeral, her sister said softly, "That baby isn't yours." Before I begin, let me tell you something. What her sister whispered to me that day at the funeral didn't just break me. It rebuilt me into someone I never imagined I could become. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why I'm grateful she said it, even though it nearly destroyed me first. If stories about love, betrayal, and the strange mercy of truth move you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now and leave a like, because this one is going to stay with you long after it ends. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I was 41 years old when I buried my wife, Claire. And I thought I knew everything about her. I thought I knew our life. I thought I knew our daughter, Lily. I was wrong about all of it. Claire and I met at a laundromat in Asheville, North Carolina, in the summer of 2011. That detail matters because nothing about how we started was glamorous. I was 30 years old, recently laid off from a construction management position, doing my own laundry for the first time in years because I could no longer afford the dry cleaning service I had grown used to. She was 27, sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair, reading a novel with a cracked spine and yellow pages, her red hair pulled into a messy knot on top of her head. She was wearing paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt that was far too large for her, and when the dryer buzzed, she didn't move. She just turned a page. I remember standing there, holding my detergent, and thinking that she was the most unbothered person I had ever seen. Everyone else in that laundromat looked miserable. But Claire looked like she had chosen to be there, like there was nowhere else she would rather be than in that plastic chair with that falling-apart book. I found the courage to speak to her only because the machine I needed was directly next to hers. "Good book?" I asked. She looked up. Her eyes were green, the deep kind, like moss after rain. She studied me for a moment, then smiled and said, "Terrible book, actually. But I'm almost done, and I refuse to quit anything." That sentence. That one sentence was the thread that pulled me into her life. I refuse to quit anything. It sounded so strong. So certain. I fell in love with the idea of her before I even fell in love with her. And maybe that was my first mistake. We dated for 14 months. She was an artist, a painter who worked mostly in watercolors and sold her pieces at weekend markets and small galleries around the Blue Ridge Parkway. She didn't make much money, but she didn't seem to need much. Her apartment was tiny, filled with canvases and jars of brushes and the constant smell of turpentine and chamomile tea. I loved being there. I loved how different her world was from the rigid, numbers-driven construction sites I was used to. We married in October of 2012, a small ceremony in her mother's backyard. Her mother, Patricia, was kind but quiet, the sort of woman who communicated more with her eyes than with words. And then there was Claire's sister, Nora. Nora was 3 years older, sharper in personality, more direct. Where Claire floated through rooms, Nora cut through them. She worked as an accountant in Charlotte and drove up for holidays and birthdays. She and Claire were close, but it was the kind of closeness that held tension beneath the surface, like two vines growing around the same tree, competing for sunlight without ever admitting it. At the wedding, Nora pulled me aside during the reception. She held a glass of wine and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Take care of her, Daniel. She's not as strong as she pretends to be." I nodded and told her I would. I meant it completely. But I realize now that Nora was trying to tell me something deeper, something I wasn't ready to hear. Our first 3 years of marriage were beautiful. Not perfect, but beautiful in the way that real life is when two people are genuinely trying. Claire painted. I found a new job managing residential builds for a mid-size company. We bought a small house on the outskirts of Asheville with a yard big enough for a garden that Claire immediately filled with wildflowers. We talked about children. Claire wanted them desperately. I wanted them too, but I was more cautious, wanting to make sure we were financially stable first. That difference in urgency created a quiet rift between us that I didn't notice growing until it was already wide. In the fall of 2015, Claire told me she was pregnant. I remember the exact moment. I was sitting at the kitchen table going over project timelines, and she placed a positive test on top of my papers and stood there with her hands clasped together, her eyes wide and searching, as if she wasn't sure whether I would be happy. I stood up, wrapped my arms around her, and told her it was the best news I had ever received. And I meant it. I truly did. But even as I held her, I felt something in her body, a slight stiffness, a hesitation that dissolved almost instantly but left an impression on my memory like a thumbprint on wet clay. Lily was born in June of 2016. She had Claire's red hair and a round, peaceful face, and I loved her the moment I saw her. She was small and warm and perfect, and I held her in the hospital and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. Claire watched me hold Lily and she cried too, but looking back, I think her tears carried a different weight. I think her tears were carrying a secret. The years that followed were full and demanding. Lily grew fast. She was curious, energetic, and stubborn, the kind of child who asked why about everything and wasn't satisfied until she received an answer that met her standards. Claire homeschooled her until she was 5, then we enrolled her in a small Montessori program nearby. I worked longer hours as my career advanced. Claire continued painting, though less frequently. She seemed tired more often, distracted. I chalked it up to motherhood and the natural fatigue that comes with raising a small child. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't sit down enough times and say, "Tell me what's going on inside you." That failure haunts me to this day. In early 2022, Claire was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Stage 3. The doctor delivered the news with practiced calmness, but Claire received it with a stillness that frightened me. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just nodded slowly, as though someone had confirmed something she had long suspected. I was the one who fell apart. I was the one who sat in the car afterward and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white and begged God for more time. The next 18 months were a war. Chemotherapy. Radiation. Brief periods of remission that felt like miracles, followed by relapses that felt like punishments. Claire handled it all with a grace that made me feel both proud and helpless. She painted when she had the strength. She read to Lily every single night, no matter how sick she felt. She made plans for the future even as her body was telling her there might not be one. She planted new wildflowers in the garden every spring. She refused to quit anything. During those months, Nora visited more frequently. She would drive up from Charlotte on weekends and sit with Claire while I took Lily to the park or ran errands. I was grateful for her presence. But I also noticed something between the sisters that I couldn't name. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Long looks exchanged across the dinner table. Once, I walked into the bedroom and found Nora sitting on the edge of the bed, holding Claire's hand, both of them crying silently. When they saw me, Nora wiped her eyes quickly and stood up, saying she was just emotional about the treatment. I believed her. I had no reason not to. Claire died on a Wednesday morning in September of 2023. Lily was 7 years old. The hospice nurse had warned me that the end was near, but nothing prepares you for the moment when the person you love takes their last breath and the room changes. The air changes. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's full, heavy with the weight of everything that will never be said again. I held Claire's hand for a long time after she was gone. Lily was at school, and I was glad for that, because I didn't want her to see me like that, broken open and unable to form words. I called Nora first. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her, she made a sound that I will never forget, a low, guttural moan, like something ancient and raw had been pulled from her chest. She said she would be there by evening. And she was. The funeral was held on a Saturday at a small chapel near our home. Claire had wanted something simple, and I honored that. Wildflowers instead of formal arrangements. Her favorite music playing softly. A small gathering of friends and family, people who had actually known her, not acquaintances filling seats out of obligation. Patricia, Claire's mother, sat in the front row, her face carved from stone, her grief so deep it had gone beyond tears. Lily sat beside me in a navy blue dress, holding a drawing she had made for her mother, a picture of their garden with every flower labeled in careful, crooked handwriting. I kept my arm around her the entire service. After the burial, people gathered at our house. Food appeared on every surface, casseroles and pies and things wrapped in foil that I knew I would never eat. People spoke to me in soft voices, offering condolences that blurred together into a single hum of sympathy. I nodded and thanked them and felt absolutely nothing. Grief had hollowed me out. It was late in the afternoon when Nora found me. Most of the guests had left. Lily was in her room with Patricia. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the wildflower garden through the window, when Nora came up beside me. She was still in her black dress. Her eyes were swollen. She held a glass of water in both hands, gripping it like an anchor. "Daniel," she said softly. "I need to tell you something." I turned to look at her. Something in her voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't sadness. It was fear. "Claire made me promise not to tell you while she was alive," Nora continued. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But she also made me promise that after she was gone, I would. She said you deserved to know." My heart began to pound. "Know what?" Nora looked down at her glass. Then she looked back up at me, and her eyes filled with tears that spilled over instantly, as though they had been waiting behind a dam that had just cracked. "That baby isn't yours," she said. "Lily isn't yours, Daniel." The kitchen didn't move, but I felt the floor tilt. I felt the walls lean inward. I heard the words, but they didn't land immediately. They hovered in the air between us like something fragile and dangerous, and then they fell, and when they hit, they shattered everything. "What are you talking about?" My voice sounded foreign to me. Flat. Mechanical. Nora set the glass down on the counter. Her hands were trembling. "In 2015, you and Claire were going through a rough patch. You were working 70-hour weeks. She was lonely. She felt invisible. She made a mistake, Daniel. She had an affair. It was brief, only a few weeks. The man was someone she met at an art show. When she found out she was pregnant, she ended it immediately. She wanted it to be yours. She convinced herself it could be yours. But she knew. Deep down, she always knew." I couldn't breathe. The air had turned solid. I leaned against the counter and pressed my hands flat against the surface because I needed something real, something cold and hard and undeniable, to keep me from collapsing. "She was going to tell you," Nora went on, crying openly now. "So many times, she was going to tell you. But then Lily was born, and you loved her so completely, and Claire couldn't bear to take that away from you. And then the cancer came, and everything became about survival, and the secret just kept getting buried deeper and deeper. But it ate at her, Daniel. It ate at her every single day. In the end, she told me she believed the guilt was worse than the cancer." I stared at Nora. I stared at this woman who had just detonated the foundation of my entire life with a whisper. And the first thing I felt, before the anger, before the betrayal, before the devastating grief of losing not only my wife but the story of my marriage, was a strange, sharp clarity. Because suddenly, all those moments that had never quite made sense, Claire's stiffness when she told me about the pregnancy, the whispered conversations with Nora, the tears I had walked in on, the way Claire sometimes looked at Lily with an expression that wasn't just love but something heavier, something closer to apology, all of it clicked into place like the final pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. I asked Nora to leave. Not unkindly. I just couldn't be near another person. She nodded, squeezed my arm, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door close a few minutes later. And then I was alone with the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room in the dark, turning the revelation over and over in my mind like a stone in a tumbler, waiting for it to smooth out, waiting for it to become something I could hold without it cutting me. It didn't smooth out. It stayed jagged and brutal. The questions came in waves. Who was the man? Did he know about Lily? Did Claire ever love me the way I loved her, or was our entire marriage a performance built on guilt? And the most painful question of all, the one that sat on my chest like a weight, did any of it matter now that she was gone? In the days that followed, I went through the motions of grief and daily life. I got Lily to school. I made her breakfast. I helped her with homework. But every time I looked at her, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I searched her face for traces of myself and found none. The red hair was Claire's. The stubborn curiosity I had always attributed to my side of the family now seemed untethered, belonging to a stranger I had never met. 2 weeks after the funeral, I drove to Charlotte to see Nora. I needed more answers. She met me at a coffee shop near her office, looking exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. She told me everything she knew. The man's name was Aidan. He was a photographer from Raleigh who had shown work at the same gallery where Claire exhibited. Their affair lasted 6 weeks. Claire ended it the day she suspected she was pregnant. She never told Aidan. As far as Nora knew, he had no idea Lily existed. I asked Nora why Claire had chosen her as the keeper of this secret. Nora's answer broke me in a new way. Because I was the one who told her to keep it, Nora said. When Claire first told me what happened, I was furious. But then she told me she was pregnant, and she was terrified, and I looked at my little sister and I made a choice. I told her to let it go. I told her to let you believe the baby was yours because I thought it would protect everyone. I thought the truth would only cause destruction. I was wrong, Daniel. I was wrong, and I've carried that guilt alongside her for 7 years. I sat with that for a long time. 2 sisters. 1 secret. A decision made out of fear and love and the desperate belief that silence could function as mercy. I understood it, even as it enraged me. I understood it because I had done my own version of the same thing throughout my marriage, staying silent about my concerns, about the distance I felt, about the questions I should have asked, because I believed that not speaking was the same as not hurting. We were all guilty of choosing comfort over truth. For several months, I existed in a kind of limbo. I continued raising Lily. I read to her at night the way Claire had. I took her to school and picked her up and asked her about her day. But there was a wall inside me now, a barrier between my heart and hers that hadn't been there before, and I hated it. I hated that the knowledge of biology had introduced a distance into a love that had been, until that moment, the purest thing in my life. Lily was the same child. The same laugh. The same crooked handwriting. The same habit of asking why until she was satisfied. Nothing about her had changed. Everything about my perception had. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in December. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing. She had taken up art, naturally, the way water follows a downhill path, and she was sketching the wildflower garden from memory. I stood behind her and watched. She had drawn every flower, labeled each one, just as she had in the picture she brought to the funeral. And at the bottom of the page, she had written a sentence in her careful, 7-year-old handwriting, "For Daddy, because you take care of the flowers now." I read that sentence, and something inside me broke open. Not broke apart. Broke open. Like a seed splitting to let the root emerge. This child had not betrayed me. This child had not lied to me. This child had loved me unconditionally for every day of her 7 years on Earth, and I was the only father she had ever known. Biology hadn't tucked her in at night. Biology hadn't taught her to ride a bike or held her when she had nightmares or danced with her in the kitchen on Saturday mornings while pancakes burned on the stove. I had done those things. Me. And no revelation, no matter how painful, could undo 7 years of showing up. I knelt beside Lily and looked at her drawing and told her it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She smiled, and in that smile, I saw everything I needed. Not Claire's guilt. Not a stranger's genetics. Just my daughter, looking at me with complete trust, asking nothing of me except what I had always given, presence, love, and the promise that I would not leave. I chose Lily that night. Not because I had to. Because she was mine. Not by blood, but by every measure that actually matters. By time. By sacrifice. By the 1,000 invisible threads that weave a parent and child together until the bond is so deep that no truth, however devastating, can sever it. In the months that followed, I began the slow, agonizing work of forgiving Claire. Not because what she did was acceptable. It wasn't. The affair was a betrayal. The years of deception were a betrayal. But Claire was gone, and anger directed at the dead is a fire that only burns the living. I had to find a way to release it, not for her sake, but for mine, and for Lily's. I went to therapy. I sat in a small office with a patient woman named Dr. Redmond who let me rage and cry and contradict myself for weeks before she gently helped me see that forgiveness is not the same as approval. Forgiveness is the decision to stop carrying the weight of someone else's mistake. It is not saying what happened was fine. It is saying what happened will not define the rest of my life. I also forgave Nora. That took longer. Her complicity in the secret felt like a separate betrayal, a betrayal of the sibling bond one had trusted her to honor. But over time, as we talked more honestly than we ever had, I came to see her not as a villain but as a flawed human being who had made a frightened decision at 28 and spent the next 7 years regretting it. She loved Claire. She loved Lily. And in her own imperfect way, she had been trying to protect us all. Nora and I actually grew closer after everything came to light. She became a more present aunt to Lily, driving up from Charlotte twice a month, taking her to art exhibits and ice cream shops and the kinds of outings that made Lily's face light up in ways that reminded me so much.